So I'm playing the Continental Club in Austin, Texas, and it's a big night for me because competition is fierce. As far as I was concerned, all the great guitar players were playing there, and I was just lucky to be on the team coach kind of thing. And we're playing, and this woman comes into the Continental Club, and she was from Nashville, had a very kind of somewhat heavy New York accent. And she was an executive in Nashville, worked at these big labels, and she was now a publicist. And she said, look, I can't get you on country radio ever. You're too Texas and too raw, and they're just not going to go for it, but I can get you on television. I was like, great. She goes, well, I want to get you on this show called Crook and Chase, which is about, 5 inches below the Christian Broadcasting Network. I mean, for me, for a free thinker from Austin like me, So she calls me the next day, I go up to Nashville, very cliched, stereotypical trip to, it's my first time in Nashville ever. I'm thinking, well, I'll get on this show. It's pretty square. My friends won't get it, but my parents will see it and they won't worry about me. Everybody at the family reunion is probably going to watch it. And they were worried about me because I'm playing like cool gigs in Austin and then going outside of Austin and playing like biker parties and redneck joints and pretty rough joints. And just trying to make that money and make that rent and, hamster in the wheel. And so I get there and we go to the Opry Plaza and all that stuff where they shoot it. And of course, I can't afford to stay where all the country stars are staying. So I'm staying, at like a Motel 5 or whatever. And there's lot lizards out in the parking lot and people doing drugs, and it's sketchy. And I'm keeping my guitars with me inside. And they wouldn't let you bring your band. So they had the band on the show, which were, a bunch of great players, but they weren't Texas-type players. And they had those, like, real neon two-tone Garth Brooks-looking outfits on, that they had, where a part of it's blue and part of it's yellow, and just pretty hideous looking back on it. And all of them had the sweet mullets, and they looked like Kenny from that Eastbound and Down show, and so they learned my song, and I went up and did the sound check, and Evelyn Shriver is her name. She comes backstage and says, hey, Kris Kristofferson's going to be on the show tonight. And I was like, wow, this just got a whole lot cooler. My mom's crush is going to be on the show tonight. And so I get to meet Kris, and Kris sees me play, and it was really weird that night because Kris put his capo on the wrong fret on national TV and started the band over on TV. If you want to see people freak out in Nashville, and he thought it was no big deal. It was like, take the ribbon. Hold on, guys, hold on. Take the ribbon from your hair, And I mean, you just don't do that on TV. And Kris just could not have cared less, right? He thought it was funny, and of course he went up there and killed it, and he sounded amazing. He looks probably the most beautiful human being you'll ever be in the presence of. It's the reason he's a movie star. And he comes backstage after it, and he's like, hey man, do you want to come to the Gibson Guitar Factory and hang out? And I was like, absolutely. So we went and jumped in this town car and burned one on the way over, and we immediately just got on like a house on fire and started talking about Bukowski and James Joyce and writers and all these subversive writers. I told him I was a big Hunter fan. Of course, he knew Hunter, which fascinated me, and it's very surreal, So anyway, we hang out at the Gibson Guitar Factory. We play these guitars from the early 1800s that feel like they're breathing in your arms. They're so beautiful. And So I said, okay, that was a great night. Kris was great. We took him to the bus. He jumped on the bus. See you later, amigo. Just something out of a fairy tale. And I said, well, I'll just tell everybody back home and that'll be good. And the next morning I'm about to take off and I get this phone call in my room. Hey, Hoss, I saw you on TV last night and come down and pick some guitar for me. I said, who is this? He said, Waylon Jennings. I said, how'd you know where I was staying? He goes, again, I'm Waylon Jennings, which was hilarious. And so I got in this car and I pulled the map out because this is before cell phones and GPS, and tried to go find what was this, Woodland Studios. Yeah, beautiful studio, very legendary. A lot of great records done there.
Dust in the Wind, Devil Went Down to Georgia.
Yeah.
Will a Circle Be Unbroken?
Yeah, a bunch of great stuff. They have one of those natural reverb rooms. I don't know if you know about that, but there's an actual reverb room in it where they just put a mic in there, and it's just, you hit your hand, it goes pop, 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 And anyway, knocked on the door, and Johnny Cash opens the door. And he goes, I was just standing there with my mouth open, didn't say anything. He goes, well, you gonna stand there with your mouth open or come in and play that thing? And then there was a kind of a hallway walking down towards it. And he kind of puts his arm around me and he goes, Jess, have you ever seen Aliens? I go, you mean like real aliens? He goes, no, the movie Aliens. I go, yeah, Ridley Scott, Sigourney Weaver, I love it. He goes, we just watched it on the bus last night. He goes, check this out. And he walks in and he grabs the microphone. He goes, put some reverb on this mother. And he did, and he does this impression of Bill Paxton. He goes, we're all fucked and doomed, man. And he sounded nothing like Bill Paxton and everything like Johnny Cash. And that was the first 5 minutes. Like, that was the first few minutes. And then Waylon called me back to play on his record, Right for the Time. That day we were covering a Willie song, and I got to play on his record, Right for the Time, and that was kind of the beginning of that. And well, there's footage, for the listeners or people who are reviewing this. You can put in my name with Waylon Jennings and Johnny Cash on YouTube, and because there was a whole film crew following them around at this point. They were being followed everywhere because they were older. This was in the 90s, and that was also the first day that I met Shooter, who just produced my new record. So I've become full circle. And Shooter was like 15 or 16. And I was actually closer to age with Shooter, who was sneaking cigarettes, and than I was to the guys in the band. And we worked on, I'll never forget it. We did I Never Cared for You by Willie. And Waylon's doing the sun is full with ice and gives no warmth at all. You know what I mean? And it's just me and him doing the whole thing, I was just trying to be cool and just play simple and not get in the way. And there were some adjustments, He was like, don't play too hard or don't play too rhythmically, And Waylon had this weird deal where he could brush his thumb over the top of the strings, and he would do like 2 or 3 tracks of that, and he would create this beautiful rhythm bed that was going on underneath it, everything. And it's the first time I'd ever seen it. I learned a lot from him, watching him. And, he was a brilliant harmony singer. He was one of those guys where he could just stop the song, say, let me go in there, and not rehearse it, and sing the 3rd or the 5th off the top of his head and nail it. So a natural harmony singer, a lot of great musicians, but not many of them can do that. But it was a dream come true, and it's something I always, hold near and dear. And
when it's over, Like when you walk out of the door, what was on your mind then, when that first day?
Well, I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe what I was just trying to take it all in. But I wouldn't even say I was trying to take it all in because I was just so green. I mean, I was 23, but I'd grown up listening to that music. And the great thing about playing 10,000 hours of bar gigs before anybody knows who you are is you can instinctually hear the changes that are coming in songs that other musicians can't hear. So you can feel, if you know how songs are arranged, then you can feel the chorus. I'm not going to do this chorus the second time. It's got to be a bridge coming. Boom, I was right. It was the bridge. A lot of times it's 1-4-5 with the 2 and the 6 thrown in, and it's, it ain't rocket science. And but there was some weird stuff, like I would go in really prepared. I would hound, like when I played on the Ray Price record, they were telling me I was going to have to read charts. So I spent like 3 weeks just brushing up. And then, of course, I got there and no one was reading anything. But it was in Los Angeles and there was a big orchestra.
So these weren't Nashville number charts.
No, it was the Texas root Texas band, but we had Beck, the guy Beck, his father, David, arranging an orchestra there. And that was amazing too. The next encounter was recording Right for the Time. And I came back to Nashville like a month later and played lead guitar on that record. I was the lead guitar player on that record. And that record really holds up. And producer Randall did a really good job of not doing any timely things that would date it. Pretty cool. And we got to hang out and, I got to know Jesse. I just kind of grouped with Jesse recently, not that long ago, in Nashville. And we went down to Robert's Western Wear and, but she's a great artist of her own right. That people don't realize that because she's married to like the coolest guy in the history of cool, but she sang, she had all kinds of cool stuff that she did, and she had her own way of playing piano, this kind of gospel, country, hillbilly gospel kind of thing. And it's a weird place to live these days. It's always been a weird place. It's kind of a no man's land because you're too rock for country, too country for rock. But now those things don't really matter anymore because, kids today, including my own son, they just cherry pick genres. Whereas we were brought up around scenes. But, the thing that people don't understand about Waylon is they think that he was driving around in a pickup truck listening to Hank Sr. the whole time. But in reality, he was listening to these songwriters. He was listening to Jackson Browne, Mark Knopfler, Neil Young. He did Are You Ready for the Country by Neil Young. If those people that listened, that bought that record, half of them would have known that this free thinker from Kansas or from Canada wrote that. George Jones did one of the greatest, I think his greatest vocal performance of all time for me is Bartender's Blues, which was written by James Taylor. And James Taylor sings on the chorus and of the original cut. David Allan Coe doing These Days by Jackson Browne. So these people who think that these are light rock bands because they didn't get turned on to them in a cool way and they heard some soft-ass single on FM radio, man, they're really missing the point. Because if you get a bunch of great players together and none of them have a good song between them, it's kind of a waste of time.
There's an episode of Crook and Chase, if I can bring it back to Crook and Chase, where Waylon and Neil Young are on there together.
Yeah.
And you could just see how much that both of them just love being in each other's company.
Yeah.
It's got so much great energy, and I'm sure the people hosting the show had no feel for what was happening there. And they did Are You Ready for the Country?
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful clip.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've seen that clip too. And, if those two guys can keep it together, I think the rest of the country could pull it together too. You know what I mean? Because they were on far different spectrums. Well, I went to the store with him one day, and he was playing the first, he had a Jaguar. He was driving a brand new Jag, and went to the store with him one day, and he was playing the first Dire Straits record. And it's amazing because this is a long time before Knopfler would have this huge effect on Nashville. I say there was two things that really happened. Steve Earle and Richard Bennett changed the sound in Nashville. Guitar Town, I don't know if it went platinum, but it definitely went gold and was somewhat of a hit. And, not to put words in Steve's mouth, I'm a huge Steve Earle fan, but, you could tell immediately he wasn't going to be the trained monkey that kept spitting out the same record. He's probably young and growing as a writer, but that record had a profound effect on the sound of all that 6-string tenor bass and just the way they did that record. And then the next thing that would happen would be Knopfler. And so you started hearing like Mary Chapin Carpenter and people like this that were coming up, getting hits off of Dire Straits songs. But that's how cool Waylon was, is he saw it early. And if you listen to Southbound again, it's just funk. They could be a band, they could be a bunch of hippie rednecks from Georgia. Southbound again, with that Jerry Reed, claw shit going on. And yeah, these guys were great songwriters, but they were also great at identifying other songs that they think a lot of people would connect with. And there's a whole separate talent for that. I call it Waylonizing. Like, he Waylonized a bunch of songs. He actually did Baker Street. I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it's super rare, and the listeners can look it up. But if you ever heard Baker Street, the sax, he does it on telly. He goes, here we are down on Baker Street. And it's awesome. Because you know why? Because he could do whatever he wanted. There's a reimagining, almost the way, they did in Russia, where they just kind of reinvented their history. There's a way with that now with people who become super traditional, and they don't want to see these guys like outside of their, I'm a country guy, I got a gun in my gun rack. They did have all that, but they were also guys that had been traveling the world, playing in New York, and when, there was 200 people at the Lone Star. And this is before, Honky Tonk Heroes. And people don't realize that they were being exposed to all these writers. Gordon Lightfoot was like high on their list. Like Cash and Waylon loved Gordon Lightfoot, And I don't know if that was because Cash brought in Dylan, because Cash kind of ushered that in. Cash was a pretty progressive guy. He's misunderstood too. He was, bringing in Bob Dylan to be on your first television show. He got like death threats, and, it's very much like the forefathers of the Constitution are being reinterpreted. The highwaymen are too. And that's not to say that Waylon wasn't a good old boy and leaned more to the right. He definitely did, you know what I mean? But he was also a guy who traveled and had seen a lot of stuff. And
Johnny Cash just had some sort of a monument
at
the Capitol. What do you think about that? What would Cash think about that?
I think Roseanne said it well. Like, I think he would have been proud of it. All that stuff about helping underprivileged people and poor people, that's how he really was. He didn't go and play in prisons so it could make him look like a badass. He went there to play for them because nobody else would. So he's another one that I think's been, they do it to a lot of people. This mainstream audience will come in and kind of reinterpret who these people are for their own, beliefs. And I think Cash is the biggest one out of the Highwaymen. I mean, Cash was really, he was against war. He was marching in the streets. He was best friends with Bob Dylan, and he was also a country boy. Yeah, and the chances of Johnny Cash becoming who he became, you can say it's predestined or ordained or whatever, but the chances of him becoming who he came, considering what he came from, are like 1 billion to 1. And really all of them were like that. If you want to really know about Johnny Cash, man, listen to that song, The Devil, on that Kris Kristofferson record.
To Beat the Devil.
To Beat the Devil. And it's really explains a lot about like Cash kept having to overcome things. They accused him of having an African-American wife, when he got caught with all that speed, which is pretty hardcore, even by today's standards, going across the Mexican border. He was wild. The fact that he was so wild that Waylon Jennings had to do his intervention. That's just unbelievable. You got to be pretty messed up to have Waylon, who's, I love all those guys, and one thing I've learned is there'll never be anyone like them, and you can't mimic them. You've got to find your own path. You've got to do your own thing. You've got to bring in your own influences. And because I've heard 1,000 guys try to mimic them, and I've tried to do it. I used to play a gig at the Broken Spoke in Austin that was the biggest weekly residency gig in Austin. A place would just be packed out every Thursday night. And I'd get up there and do my best George Jones or my best Waylon. And eventually I had to leave the Velvet Coffin and go out into the mean, cold world and lose my shirt on the road and bomb in Des Moines about 6 times before people started showing up. You have to do that. And that's what I learned from those guys, was to follow your own path. Don't compare yourself to other people, and just do your own thing. And all of them were so strikingly original when you hear them individually. When I met them, it was before the Rick Rubin thing had taken off. It was just taking off. So you would hear Cash on the TV in the next room doing a Taco Bell commercial, run for the border. They were doing all kinds of stuff. And
he was playing in Branson.
Yeah, he's playing in Branson. And these careers have had peaks and valleys. Shooter told me later the real interesting thing about the day that I was with them was Waylon and John had gotten in a falling out because John had to go do this Rick Rubin thing, which is about to just blow up, and he couldn't do this Highwaymen thing. So they hadn't talked to each other in a few months. And so that was the first day back, and they were so happy to be back in each other's company that they were laughing at everything. And I didn't know that until probably 6 or 7 years ago. Shooter told me that.